I'm Sophie, Communications Manager at the club. I think I've emailed most of you. I've definitely cropped most of your headshots at some point. So it's nice to put a name to them faces and actually see you all. I'm joined by Vittoria Cavarero, international business student at the University of Liverpool. Alice Smith, who is a girl guiding advocate, along with quite a lot of other things, as I'm sure you'll touch on, and Michelle Wells, Director of Brand Strategy and Corporate Communications at Keyloop. And for the next sort of half hour, we're going to be speaking about the impact of the Automotive 30% Club outreach through our Inspiration for Innovation Network and our Inspiring Automotive Women Day. And we're all going to sort of share some different insights, really, from different perspectives. So just for the benefit of those that don't know, hopefully most of you do, the Inspiration for Innovation Network is a national network of volunteers from within our member organisations who work with schools and universities, and also primary schools, to address gender imbalance in the sector by reaching out to young people and informing them, and also hopefully inspiring them to consider careers in the sector. Similar to our Inspiring Automotive Women Day, where obviously inspirational women from within our member organisations, there's obviously lots of them, speak to the young women, to other young women, about the diverse and exciting jobs within the sector. And we've reached out to both Alice and Vittoria through them sort of platforms. So you've heard a bit of background on the outreach networks. Now time to hand over to the panel. So Vittoria, if you want to start off by giving a bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Vittoria and I am an undergraduate student at the University of Liverpool studying international business with a year in industry. I remember the first time I met Julia and got to know the Automotive 30% Club. It was at the Inspiring Automotive Women event in 2019, which I attended with my F1 in Schools team and the school's robotics team. And then later that year, my team and I got invited to speak at the annual conference, where we got to share our experiences as young women just entering and approaching the automotive field, and talking about how the IAW event inspired us to pursue our interests in the field and, just getting out of our comfort zone. Looking back, I can say I'm extremely grateful to have been able to attend the event, because I was unaware of the opportunities that this industry offers to both men and women, and especially the lack of female workforce that there is. And although, yes, I would have probably discovered it as I got older, that in-person and very immersive experience just changed our whole perspective, and it really changed the game and disproved our beliefs that the automotive industry is not really a place for women. So it really changed the game.
Yeah, and I think actually the last conference that you attended was our last in-person one, so you've been quite fortunate to attend both of them. I think you've attended more than me, actually. So Alice, let's hear a bit more about you, please.
So hi everyone, I'm Alice. As Julia said, I'm a girl guiding advocate. I'm also a Year 12 student studying history, geography and politics. Alongside my guiding role, I'm also a wheelchair basketball player and a member of the STEMET's Futures Youth Board as an accessibility consultant. I met Julia and, as she mentioned, Laura Harvey in February 2020, which seems like an age ago, even though it was only 2 years ago. They came and spoke to us as Girl Guiding Advocates. So a bit of background about the advocates. We are spokespeople for Girl Guiding. There's currently 16 of us between the ages of 14 and 21. We speak out for Girl Guiding, and they provided a fabulous insight to what it's like to do it in more of a commercial sector. We focus more on the charity side of things. And I was really inspired by them. They gave such an interesting perspective into a career in automotive that I was never offered through school. I go to a pretty average state school, and it's kind of lucky if all of us pass at least 5 GCSEs. Maths and English isn't always a given at my school that you'll pass it. So getting that perspective outside was such a powerful experience.
Yeah, and you've also got a passion for motorsport, haven't you?
Yeah, so I love F1 and Formula E, so I'm slightly jealous that I wasn't involved in F1 in schools. But I did a 4-month mentorship with Mercedes F1 last year, which was, again, an incredible experience. And yeah, I love F1 a lot. My poor family, kind of our Sundays revolve around when it's on Channel 4. But yeah, I love it so much. It's a bit random, but you know, it's fun.
Sounds like you keep yourself pretty busy though, to be fair. And finally, Michelle, can you share a bit about yourself and your involvement with the Inspiration for Innovation Network?
Yes, absolutely. So, as mentioned, I'm Director of Brand Strategy and Corporate Communications at Keyloop. I've actually been at Keyloop for a decade, so seen it change quite a lot over that time, and thankfully seen it become, more diverse and more inclusive, because it was very male-dominated when I first started. But I've always thought diversity and inclusion was particularly important, and shamelessly, I first met Julia when I was putting on a C-level conference for our customers, and I really wanted someone to speak inspirationally about how important it was to have a diverse workforce and introduce some different topics to the sorts of agenda items we'd normally have. But I was really inspired when I met her, so came back and started talking to my managers at the time, saying I really think we need to join this organisation, it's incredibly valuable. She spoke at our conference, unsurprisingly did a wonderful job, and our relationship has absolutely just grown from there, really. And as I mentioned, you heard from Tom earlier, who is a patron member of the club. We're also sponsoring the Inspiration for Innovation Network, which has been a fantastic experience, both externally for everybody we've met through it, and internally for the people who have participated through it.
Great, thank you. So back to you then, Alice. We spoke about your passion for motorsport then, and you did have a passion for that before you encountered the club, I think. But did Julia's talk help to encourage you to consider to pursue a career in automotive?
Definitely, it kind of gave a more tangible outcome to what a career in automotive could look like. It's not just kind of a industry that was out of reach for me anymore. Actually, it was achievable. And I think we've heard this a lot. Oddly enough, I'm not sure if you've guessed I am disabled, but there's so many more barriers in place for me from someone who from a working class background, as a disabled young woman, as a neurodiverse young woman. But that talk kind of helped break some of the barriers down. And whilst I think it was mentioned in the previous panel, the root of the problem is schools, and as an industry we can't overly change that. However, talks like the one that Julia delivered, like the one that the club has delivered in all sorts of educational establishments, do help break that down. And whilst we can't systemically change the education system as much as I try to, stuff like that can help.
Great. So Victoria, over to you next. So we've touched on the fact that you've encountered the club a couple of times. Once our Inspiring Automotive Women Day at Volkswagen Group back in 2019. And also you obviously spoke in person at our last conference at Auto Trader. So can you share how these events help to raise your awareness about careers in the sector?
Yeah, sure. So definitely both of the events enable me to expand my knowledge on the industry. They made me and my team realize that it should not be an only male-dominated industry, and it encouraged us to, become part of the gender and diversity fight, and as being the next generation, as representing the next generation, and to make that change happen by pursuing what we like and just getting out of our comfort zone. At that age, we were inexperienced, and thanks to our amazing role models who took us to the events and to the club's volunteers who took the time to guide us through everything, we just amplified so much more our perspective. I remember when, among the many different things we could do to get involved in automotive, they told us about apprenticeships. And I was surprised and intrigued because up until that point, no one had really explained to me what apprenticeships were. So I never really took into consideration that option as an alternative to university. And then I remember being told that in the automotive industry, it's not just about engineering and mechanics. It's actually a lot of the gender gap occurs at the executive level. And for example, that's when I started to gain an interest in a career in this field at the managerial and executive level.
Yeah, definitely, and I can certainly vouch for the fact that there are management apprenticeships and things like that in the automotive sector. I did a degree apprenticeship through the Automotive 30% Club, and obviously that's at sort of a corporate level. So yeah, I think you're right in terms of it's often about addressing not just the fact that it's a male-dominated sector, but also the roles that are available to women and to obviously all people of all walks of life. Okay, so thank you for that. So now I'll come to you then, Michelle. So we've touched slightly on the fact that we, as part of the Inspiration for Innovation Network, we did a campaign with the University of Northampton this year, and we spoke specifically with their international marketing students. So you were obviously quite fitting for that role as a volunteer, but can you talk to us about your experience of volunteering for that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had a fantastic and really positive experience. It was all really well organised. Sophie and I had a good briefing call before. And the one thing I'd say is it really took very little of my time, but it was such an enjoyable experience. And honestly, I got so much from it. So all I did was film a 15-minute video with Sophie that talked about my career history and the different opportunities that exist in marketing today, and what it was like to work in the automotive industry and why I thought it was so important that the industry becomes more diverse and inclusive. And then that video was played in one of the lectures to the marketing students, and they were then given the opportunity to have a 45-minute interactive Q&A, which was so interesting because I think, we've talked a lot about the importance of working with universities, and I think if you study a master's in marketing, you're almost perhaps a little bit pre-programmed to consider careers in such FMCG or other such industries. To be able to put automotive and certainly automotive retail on the map was great, but I certainly enjoyed it immensely, and I understand the feedback from the students was quite positive as well. So just giving up such a relatively small amount of your time, even if only 2 or 3 people in that room thought about the opportunities of working in our sector that hadn't before, I think it was very worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think there's still that long-lasting impact for those students as well. And I know a number of our members took part in that, whether not necessarily the volunteers in the room today. But I think what was interesting is that just within that sort of international marketing group, there were so many different volunteers that we had. I think we had 5 altogether. They all had different career pathways to where they got. They were all at different points in their career. I know, Michelle, you sort of had I think you were one of the most senior ones that we took in there virtually. But yeah, I think just really showing how, you can come from loads of different backgrounds and still ultimately get to the same destination. And yeah, I think also that 15-minute conversation, I think a lot of the time it helps you to reflect on yourself. I know myself and Julia recorded one, and it's not until you sit back and you think, oh yeah, I did that. Like at 17 at school, the things that you did, you might not think that they impacted you, but I think really looking at that and, as we've spoke about, helping to address that at an earlier age, and looking at the opportunities that are available. So Victoria then, as a university undergraduate yourself, how do you suggest that we can attract female business students to join our member organisations?
So I think the education stage is the most important in terms of understanding what you like and what path your career could potentially take. The more students engage with extracurricular activities, the more they're exposed to professionals and people who are already in the industry, the more they start to experience real life and imagine their career and their future. So I think, tapping in the education stage really early, it's really important. As the previous panel said, the education is quite simple, it's basic, so it is so easy to attract people, to attract females, to attract students into the industry. And I think engaging with the students in person, firsthand, is extremely, extremely important to get their attention. Partnering up with universities and organizing social events in order to meet with the students and talk to them, face to face. It's just very different compared to a Zoom meeting. And often companies also get a lot of media exposure through the university's platforms, which students check on regularly. I think what many already do is offering graduate schemes, undergraduate placement schemes, summer courses, internships, which students are very interested in because we usually want to get some experience, we want to get knowledge of the sector. Or what I've seen do is companies sending ex-interns or current interns to speak at the universities, organizing social events, so that the students can actually speak to their peers and, you know, ask them questions. Perhaps it's a little less intimidating. Or what I think is really another interesting method is for the companies to actually organize these events on the company's premises. So in the office, it's just a really good way to show them around, show them what the working environment looks like, and it's just providing them with that different experience, which is more likely to be remembered by them. And of course, everything that I've just said can be, you know, used to attract a female audience through targeted social media campaigns, adverts, using hashtags, big titles, and getting the universities to really sponsor them and convey, you know, the aim of enlarging the female workforce in the industry.
Fantastic, and I think you mentioned when you went to Volkswagen Group for the Inspiring Automotive Women Day, I think that really stuck with you, didn't it?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of just the building in general, really. And,
Definitely.
And sort of remembering that as a lasting legacy, as we've been speaking about.
Definitely, it's the school is very basic, and it's very, you know, we are stuck in this routine, and whenever the school organized something or our teacher took us to these different events, we were all so excited because it was a way for us to kind of break out of our routine and experience more like the working world and different industries. Yeah,
and I think it's easy for sort of our member organisations, you know, when we're in the corporate world, it's easy to just go to the office every day and just think, oh, that's my office. But actually, it's pretty cool to someone that hasn't seen that before. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Victoria. So Alice, our members obviously are keen to ensure that they include underrepresented women, as we've spoken about this morning. But what would you personally, what would personally encourage you to apply for a company?
I think there's so many elements to this, and I could probably talk for the rest of the day about this. But I think the main kind of elements that stick in my mind is that us as a generation, us as Gen Z, we see automotive incredibly differently to what our parents do, to what our grandparents do, to even how my cousins see it, and they're 10 years older than me. We might see the likes as Jaguar more associated with their motorsport involvement, not the fancy cars. And I was born in 2005, I have lived through a recession the most of my life. We didn't have those fancy things. Seeing those brands on the telly in the motorsport involvement was actually what kind of brought those brands to me. I think also, as has been spoken about consistently this morning, is making sure you're doing diversity and inclusion right. A photo on the website of a stock image, which I can find on Google, and then with the same people in the next photo where they're all standing up again, it's a bit like, oh, so you haven't actually used your real employees and you've just put a stock image to appear like you're being inclusive. And I think the big thing for me is that if you're telling me you're inclusive and you're shoving it down my throat, the majority of the time in my experience is actually that the organisation isn't inclusive. It's more like 10% actual doing and 90% marketing. And if I can notice that as a 17-year-old who's just getting started in my career, there's something more systemic than that. And I think that needs to be addressed within probably not as many member organisations, but as a whole. And kind of, if you look at our economy as a country, it is evidenced in a lot of companies. And making sure, as the lived experience panel talked about a lot, making sure your recruitment process is inclusive and keeping that talent. I would love to consider myself to have at least a bit of talent, and hopefully someone might want me to work for them in the future. Knowing that I would, number one, they would like to recruit me, but number two, they would like me to stay there. That's a big thing, because we see it in the likes of teaching and the wider STEM industries. The amount of people who leave after 5 years or less is huge. And if you haven't got that culture there, and if you haven't got those processes in place to support your disabled candidates, your neurodiverse candidates, your marginalised candidates, and then to keep them there, then it's just not going to go wrong, and you're going to lose out on all those ideas. And again, as the lived experience panel alluded to, we're not all the same. You've met me, you haven't met another wheelchair user, you haven't met another neurodiverse person. We're not here as your token, tick the box, you have a diverse person. Having been in meetings where it's like, yeah, Alice can be the token diversity, it's a horrible position to be in. We can bring everything that a straight white man can bring to your business and more. So try and support us in that.
Thank you, thanks so much for that. And finally to you then, Michelle. So as someone who is a sponsor of the Inspiration for Innovation Network and also done outreach as part of that, why would you encourage others in the audience to volunteer or to run their own education engagement programme?
Yes, absolutely. Although before I start, I only met Alice yesterday, and I would imagine people should be queuing up to recruit this remarkable young lady. Please come see us. But anyway, no, to your point, yes, both from an external perspective, I think, in terms of sponsoring initiatives such as the Inspiration for Innovation Network, as we've mentioned already, we work on a number of initiatives and programmes that aim to introduce our company and our sector to new audiences, particularly with schools and universities. And we want to present our sector as an exciting and a dynamic one with lots of opportunities that maybe people hadn't thought of or hadn't heard of. But we also want to represent it as a diverse, accessible, inclusive and welcoming one. And that's why the sponsorship opportunity of the I4I network was particularly attractive. The thought that we could get to female students who hadn't necessarily considered a career in automotive before, or even more sadly perhaps thought it wasn't for them just because they didn't know enough about it, that's great for us, not just externally but internally as well. But the people who volunteered as part of the programme, all the way from people who are young role models or people on our creative design team, right the way through to our chief people officer, have really had positive feedback about the experience. They've enjoyed sharing their career journeys, talking about the skills that are needed for people to be able to join this industry. And then in terms of other programmes that we do, Tom obviously mentioned Dealer Tech, which has been a great initiative for us, because I think if we're talking about lived experiences, I went to the University of Bath, coincidentally starting just 2 years before Alice was born, but nonetheless, I went there, and I think, I know it's a great way of making you feel old sitting on this panel, but I went there and I studied management and languages, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time. But I think in terms of working with universities' career services, I think to Victoria's point, maybe it hadn't really evolved and it was always kind of the same, and the same opportunities were presented to you and the same companies were at careers fairs. So perhaps like a little bit of a sheep or a robot, I trotted off to London to work in financial services and, or consulting, because that's what all my friends were doing, and I thought that's what you should do when you had a business degree. And actually, probably, honestly, after 6 months of living in London and working in that environment, I wasn't very happy, and it didn't suit me. I've been very lucky since then that I've had wonderful opportunities both in the technology industry and in the automotive industry that have really, opened my eyes to how you can have a really enjoyable, flexible, innovative and dynamic career. So it does come back to education. We've got to get in there early, and we've got to start getting our message across. We were very, very proud that our Dealer Tech competition could attract 1,000 students to register to find out more about our company and our industry. 1,000 students that may never have considered automotive retail before. But we didn't just stop there. We also offered masterclasses about the industry as a whole and how it worked, and how to design products, how to develop products, things that you might never learn on, a psychology degree or things like that, but, opening up the different experiences that could be possible. And, we really built relationships with these universities, and we built relationships with these students. We also acknowledged that sometimes we're not always the best people to put our message across. So we recruited ambassadors at every single university to be able to talk the language of the students who might want to come and join us and might participate in this competition. And that was hugely successful as well, because I will be the first to put my hand up and say, I don't really know how to come across very well on TikTok, but these people do. And they put us across really well, and we had a great experience working with them. They actually then came to talk to Julia and Sophie about ways in which social media could be more approachable for the club on some of these channels. So, all in all, there have been many things that made it a great success. One of the things where I think it fell a bit short is we didn't have enough women in the final, and that makes me sad. We had 6 teams in the final, but actually only one of the participants were women. Now that tells me a lot in terms of what I need to do about the recruitment for that competition when we run it next year, and how I make sure that women know it's for them as well. And one final thing, as a result of our recent acquisition of Silver Bullet, we're also working with Gen Plus now, which is an organisation in Scotland that uses digital learning tools to work with schools, both the teachers and the pupils, to equip people with the leadership skills that they'll need to become great leaders, the great leaders of tomorrow, so that education piece does start in schools and isn't something that's maybe left if you've picked the right university course or not the other course, but it starts very much at the very beginning. So all of these education initiatives, guys, these are our talent of tomorrow, so I can't advocate for them highly enough.
Thanks, Michelle, and that's a great note to end on. We've run slightly over time, so unfortunately we've not got time for questions, but I think that wraps the first part of this morning up, and we're going to go to a short refreshment break till 11:35. Please do return back after then. A huge thank you to each of our panellists, Victoria, Alice and Michelle. Thank you.